Hey everyone, welcome back to BookSquirrel, and this is my book review for Not Without Laughter by Langston Hughes. BookSquirrel, I don't know. Not Without Laughter is the third book that I have read from my Black Author TBR list. If you want to see what other books are on that list, I will put a link in the description. So I've been thinking long and hard about this. I already recorded my review for Not Without Laughter, and one of the most common things that I said to myself in that review is that I feel like the ACORN system is flawed. I try to score each of these 5 categories the same way I score them every time I read another book. And so because of that, I'm trying to almost standardize how I quantify an experience that is ultimately a qualitative experience. And so because of that, I'm going to do my review differently today. I'm going to go through the categories as normal, and I'm going to keep my review as I expressed it as best as I can. But the breakdown of the final score is not going to be based off of a potential 20 acorns in each category. Instead, I'm going to give my final score out of 100 acorns based off of the overall qualitative experience that I had with this book. And I hope it's going to make it more accurate to my feelings about what I read. For those of you who have been watching my channel and watched my other reviews, I'd like to hear from you as to whether or not you think that this is more successful, whether or not you liked this. I feel scared every time that I give a review for each section. Every time I deduct points, I'm not trying to do it as some kind of entitled, snobby critic. I just don't want my ACORN scoring system to come across as elitist or unfair in any ways. So that's the change that I'm going to make to this review. Hopefully this works out. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Before we get into the acorns though, just a little bit about the book. Not Without Laughter was originally published in 1930. The version that I have was originally published in 2018 and contains an introduction by Angela Flournoy. Not Without Laughter is approximately 231 pages long, and here is the blurb. When first published in 1930, Not Without Laughter established Langston Hughes as not only a brilliant poet and leading light of the Harlem Renaissance, but also a gifted novelist. In telling the story of Sandy Rogers, a young African-American boy in small-town Kansas, and of his family, his mother Angie, a housekeeper for a wealthy white family, his irresponsible father Jim Boy, who plays the guitar and travels the country in search of employment, his strong-willed grandmother Hagar, who clings to her faith, his Aunt Tempe, who marries a rich man, and his Aunt Harriet, who struggles to make it as a blues singer. Hughes gives the longings and lineaments of black life in the early 20th century an important place in the history of racially divided America. Onto the categories. Approach. When I had added Not Without Laughter to my TBR list, I didn't know much about it at all. What I did know is that it had to do with the Harlem Renaissance, of which Langston Hughes was a big voice. The title of the book really grabbed my attention. I found an affinity to the title instantly, just because I find Not Without Laughter to be really poignant, and I knew that this was going to be talking about some difficult subjects, and so to preface it with the words Not Without Laughter, I don't know, I felt like no matter what, I was going to be in safe hands. And I love this cover. This cover to me is so evocative, exactly of what I wanted to get out of this book. And honestly, I feel like it does the book a lot of justice. You've got this beautiful minimalist modernism going on with these yellows and oranges and this lovely contrast with the stark black. Sunflowers, a man playing guitar, a young boy listening to him, a couple of women in the background here looking like they're dancing or sitting pensively. Was very excited to get into it. Having said that, when I read the first 10% of this book, I did get a little nervous. I am not a big literary fiction reader. My attention span tends to be a bit spoiled when it comes to engaging plots and hooks and interesting lead-ups and all of this. And in, true literary fiction fashion, this book really does focus on the characters and not so much a plot. It has a plot, but it's not a plot-focused story. In the first 10%, you're primarily introduced to Sandy, the young boy that this book primarily follows, and his grandma, Aunt Hagar. She's someone of an older generation who really leads through tough love and Christianity. A significant majority of the first 10% of this book focuses on the grandma and on her perspective on life. She's a relatively lonely woman who is working very hard well into her aged existence, and her children are not really around as much as she would want, and she's regularly scolding her grandchild. So the first 3 chapters of this book, it wasn't very pleasant of an experience. I was looking forward to the feelings of what is being evoked by the cover, and the first 10% of the book was not giving me that. And that's, again, part of my own wiring, and also of the expectations that I feel like I set of this being, more of a jubilant story. I was still incredibly devoted to reading this book. I was not anywhere near about to give up, and I knew that there was important lessons for me to have in reading this book. I think I just set the wrong expectations for at least the first part of this book. Okay. It is a little slow to get started, and before it does really take off, it was kind of a negative experience for me. Characters. There is such an amazing complexity and individuality to each of the characters in this book. As the blurb mentioned, it primarily follows a Black family in a rural town in Kansas. You have the character of the grandma Hagar, her 3 daughters, including one of her daughter's husbands, and then the grandson Sandy. And that's just the characters in the family. There's still, a bunch of other characters in the neighborhood and stuff that are around too. But for the most part, you really delve in to the family life and to the different paths that these characters have taken, and also the different perspectives they all have on life. Langston Hughes does a really good job of showing each of the characters' desires and also the opportunities that each character has given the path in life that they've walked, and also how society has shaped them all. You have characters that sit on various parts of various spectrums, whether that be the color of their skin, whether that be how they look at white people, whether it be trying to follow faith, whether it be to follow education, to follow what you feel in your heart. There's just such an amazing mix of motivations and experiences that are shown through the characters in this book. And man, I know that I mentioned in the beginning how I kind of had a complaint with the tough love and the very religious stance of the grandmother, but by the end of this book, I had fallen in love with all of these characters. And one thing that I was really fascinated by with Langston Hughes's creation of these characters was he differentiated people also by their generation. You have older generations tending to speak a lot more with AAVE, which is African American Vernacular English. And then the sisters, depending on how close they are to white culture, tend to speak less of it. They tend to code switch, as it were, to the point where some of them are trying to run away from AAVE. And there's just so much intentionality. As people grow up and the past kind of moves further behind us, how do people change? And how does the younger generation differ as they grow up? It's all present here. I found there to be a magic to these characters. They really felt alive and they felt whole offerings. One of the main things that I look for in a book is, what is the experience being provided to me here? And is it an experience that I feel is worth having? And when it comes to Not Without Laughter, man, I think this book offers something that I've never had in any other book. To me, this book is a patchwork. It is a quilt of different experiences of Black life in 1910s United States. You see not only the family life and the family dynamics and how they look at each other and judge their ways as they all are trying to survive, as they're all trying to find what is going to help them be truly free of the oppression by white people. It's almost as though no matter what path you go down as a Black person in the United States, you were hitting a wall. And so many of those walls are present in this book. You hear it through stories from the older generation. You see it firsthand with people being segregated in schools, in their movie theaters, including down to pay. Most of these jobs that the characters in this book have in front of them as an opportunity are very laborious jobs. And they're the types of jobs that the white people just don't want to do. And they're so underpaid and underappreciated for their work. And there's really no security even in all of that effort that they put in. Plenty of people are doing a job, then they're laid off from a job because there's all these different ways in which the white folk have caused them to be fired or caused their working conditions to just be so miserable. So one of the offerings in this book is the experience of what it is to just be treated with such discrimination. You also see the positives. You see a lot of scenes of celebrating Black culture. You get to experience the barbershop. You get to experience the dance hall. There's so much meaning behind every character, but behind every scene, behind every setting. And one thing that I just loved was thinking about this as a play. As I was reading this, I was envisioning myself in a theater and I was watching the scenes unfolding in front of me on a stage, because it really does feel like this would translate so well into that setting. I feel like this story is just dripping with value and meaning, just waiting for people to absorb it and to look. Readability. First off, I think that the length is very accessible. I thought that the length was actually quite perfect for a book like this. When it comes to triggers, I tend to try to look for trigger warnings in books. And it's kind of hard because every book, when there's conflict, that conflict could be a trigger for someone. It's really hard to really tell what would be a trigger warning and what wouldn't be. For me, I primarily just had an issue with, like I already said at the beginning, this encompassing sense of righteous judgment from a position of faith and tough love, constantly being scolded for just not being perfect in the eyes of the person that's judging you. And so to me, that was just an early frustration I had, but I'm really not important to this book. I'm really just here to absorb it. And so if I were to say that there might be some triggers, I would assume that it's much more along the lines of the discrimination of Black people in society. There's definitely a couple of scenes that really strike pretty hard. There's a couple of stories that are told, and you really get to experience, even from Sandy's perspective, the confusion of being segregated as a kid. At the same time, I feel like Langston Hughes tells it in such an artful way that I think it would be more of just a sadness that is experienced, more so than maybe a trigger perspective. But I don't know. I find the writing at times to be a little niche. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. Okay, I think niche writing is actually flavor in this book that would primarily include Langston Hughes, like personifying music and waxing poetically at times about the scenes that are unfolding in front of him, usually in like a nightclub as people dancing or playing music. It's beautiful prose. And then one other thing I did mention before is that there are characters that speak in AAVE. Again, I think that that's not a bad thing. I think it's actually adding a lot of flavor. When I read the dialogue of the people who spoke with AAVE, there's a cadence to it. You can almost feel their emotions more. And the idea that if it was written in proper English, which would be a whitewashing of that dialogue, that it would make it more readable. This just goes to show the flaws of my system, because the more I don't really have to think about the specific words being used, the more readable I consider it to be. And yet that would be like judging a painting for being able to look at it in 2 seconds and walk away. Some of the best artwork out there really offers you so much that you can just sit and look and absorb, and you get more out of it the more time you put into it. I think this book is included in that. I think this book is gorgeous in so many ways, and I don't want to knock it because there are aspects of it that make it, in my opinion, harder to read. I think it's worth the time to put in to reading the AAVE, to reading the poetry that's in this book, to reading the personification of music. It was so cool. Even if it did cause me to really slow down, it's like a rich espresso. It's just like a sipper. At times you can just forget that you're drinking an entire Dunkin' Donuts coffee, and other times you really don't want to drink it all at once because it's more about savoring and it's more about taking that time. Narration. I've already spoken at length about most of the points I'm going to make in this category. I think the pacing of the book is amazing. I think the brush strokes that Langston Hughes takes to show this world, it makes so much sense, and he does it in a way that's so comprehensive. I find this to be a beautiful patchwork where every chapter had meaning, every character had depth, every relationship had depth. There was evolution of characters. There was so much beauty in this book. This book made me cry. This is the first book on my channel that truly brought me to tears completely because of Langston Hughes' writing. I wasn't quite sure at the beginning if I was going to like this book, and I had signs telling me that I might not, yet I wanted to read it anyways, and I'm glad I did. Some of the writing took me a little while to sit with and absorb. If anything, it's a strength of this book. I'm glad that this book made me have to think. Okay, so now that the categories are over, it is time for me to reveal my overall score for Not Without Laughter by Langston Hughes. I'm going to give Not Without Laughter by Langston Hughes a 98 out of 100. This book resonated with me so much. It was a little rocky in the beginning, fine. I loved the cover. I love the title. Now when I read the blurb, I feel a sense of connection to these characters. Whereas the first time around, I was like, oh no, literary fiction, I'm going to be bored. I don't read the blurb like that anymore. I read it with love for all of these characters. And I'm sure that if I were to reread the first 3 chapters of this book, I would have a much greater appreciation than I did the first time around, when I really didn't know that this book was going to deliver as hard as it did. The 2 points that I'm knocking off are primarily simply because the beginning and the ending I don't think are as strong as the rest of the book. I think that there's a way that it could have been ended a little bit more poignantly, and I do think the first 3 chapters could have been boiled down just a little bit. Minor complaints. I refuse to knock points off of this book because it includes AAVE. I refuse to knock off points in this book because it does wax poetically and therefore is a slower read at times. The end. Yeah, I feel like I've said all this way too much already. Garrulous, right? I'm pretty garrulous. I think everybody should read this book. I think this is really a masterpiece. I love this book. I mentioned that this book is like a patchwork. It's like a quilt. And I feel like I just want to wrap my body in this quilt. By the end of this book, I felt like these were relatives of mine. So that's that. 98 out of 100. Technically another 5-star. I feel like this book has successfully destroyed my ACORN system. But not in like a negative way. It really pointed out the flaws of my ACORN system. And for better, I think. So let me know what you thought about this change in this review. Do you think that I should keep going forward with not grading each chunk, but really grading the overall experience? I think that's probably more accurate, right? I'm going to try that going forward. Having said all of that, my next book is going to be Consider Phlebas by Ian M. Banks. One of my favorite YouTubers, Sam Not So Wise, loves the Culture series. Ian M. Banks is his favorite author. He raves about him, and it's made me very excited to see what this series is all about. I understand that the first book is not considered the best book of the series. I'm going to have about 6 or 7 days to read about 500 pages and do a review, so have to get on that right away. But that'll be my next individual review. I hope that you liked this video, and if you did, please consider leaving a like or subscribing. Let me know what you're reading in the comments, and until next time, BookSquirrel out. Bye. BookSquirrel. I don't know.